Hello, James Bogue here. This is the Yoga Top 40, and today's new entry is by a band with the same name as me, James, and the song is Sit Down. Now, many of you may be familiar with the band James, many of you maybe not. So, James are one of many great bands who hail from the northwest of England. I think James are from the Manchester area. Lots and lots of bands are from that area. I always attributed it, when I was younger, and I guess I still would, to the weather. In all of the United Kingdom, the weather is very changeable, and this island, or these islands, are subject to 5 significant weather fronts, apparently. But if one is in the northwest of England, then that weather front that comes across the Atlantic Ocean, carrying lots of rain with it, then one is likely to receive more of the brunt of that than people in other parts of the United Kingdom. So the northwest and the Manchester area is one of those parts of the UK that is especially susceptible to greyer, wetter weather. So I always imagine, there are young people there full of this creative drive and full of this talent, and some of them, they get together and they make wonderful music. And one of those bands who have made some wonderful songs over the years and blessed us with some great albums is James. And one of James's first hits was Sit Down. I think I was about 11 when this song came out. It's very well known in the UK. And so I thought I would use this to speak about the basic yoga practice, the foundational yoga practice of seated meditation. Now, of course, we can cultivate meditation. We can deepen the meditative state in all sorts of activities. We can meditate while we're standing, we can meditate while we're moving, we can meditate while we're engaged in various types of external activity. However, the foundational practice in yoga remains seated meditation practice, and there is good reason for this, many good reasons for this. Now, I have encountered in my life many people over the years who have a rather scathing, disparaging, negative attitude towards seated meditation. Such people tend to say things like, "Well, what are you doing, wasting your time sitting down there for an hour doing nothing? Think what you could be doing with that time." And they may cite people who they admire who are very, very active and who make very good use of their time. People who are very, let's say, public service minded, and people who just get on with making a difference in the world. And they say, well, this is what I would rather do than just sit there doing nothing. And I have encountered this attitude in various places and through various people, many of whom or some of whom at least, I would say, actually have something of a significant meditative practice in their lives already, through perhaps movement or some type of physical discipline or a musical discipline, for example. Any type of discipline can have a very meditative quality. However, there is still something special about just sitting down, taking a meditative posture, and then inviting all the powers of our awareness to tune in. So in the yogic method, we give the powers of our awareness, our minds, our senses, our bodily powers, an object to focus on, to orient towards, to gather around. The Sanskrit technical term is an alambana. So it's like a kind of support for our awareness. Now, the powers of our awareness, yoga recognizes they can flit here and there. The beguiling, constantly changing realm of nature may be calling our senses, pulling them in different directions all the time. So, when we give the powers of our awareness a subtle internal focal point, this is a means to train our awareness in the foundational for yoga movement from gross to subtle. We can start to tune in to subtler realms of experience. Subtle realms of experience that are very, very hard, not impossible, but very, very hard to access when we are engaged in external activity. Now, some of my greatest experiences of samadhi have come in external activity. When I was a boy, for example, sometimes playing sport, I would just get in the zone. Everything else was gone. I was just there playing the tennis or playing the basketball. I was in the game and everything else had fallen away, and I felt so high, and it was such a transcendent experience. And it was quite, it was quite life-changing. It's one of those things that made me kind of think, wow, there must be something more than all of this. Like, I have this experience that's just like so, wow, so amazing. How did that happen? It happened because I was just fully there. I practiced these sports, these games a lot, and so I'd prepared to be spontaneous. And then in the, let's say, rigor or demands of the game, the unpredictability of it, and my desire, my joy of being fully in it, allowed me to get super present, super tuned in. And so I was able to access and experience, even in the realm of external activity, this subtler realm, this vaster realm of more concentrated awareness. And I can feel this awareness running through, and it feels fantastic. Now, I was listening to an interview, or clips from an interview with the actor Hugh Jackman recently, talking about God. And he mentioned, and I know other actors over the decades have mentioned this, that when you're an actor, sometimes you're on stage and it's just transcendent. There's just this amazing experience. And you come up, you know, everything, you're just fully there, and you feel like you're with the audience, and everything is being communicated in such a clear way. It's the audience are fully there with you, and you are this conduit for the expression of this aspect of reality, this aspect of the human condition, and some truth is being transmitted through you, and it brings you fully into the present moment. And in Hugh Jackman's interview, he said he's maybe experienced that 3 or 4 times. All those years he's been acting, and he says, and you can never control that. You can never command it. You can never just call it in. Same when I was a boy playing basketball. Occasionally, it would happen. I would just get in the zone, and it was this joy. It was just this ecstasy, an ecstasy beyond ecstasy. It was just so rich. But I have no control over it. Now, I've also experienced a level of meditative engagement, or a level of meditative presence, just by applying myself to external tasks. Writing, working in the garden, making something, doing some physical work. When one is engaged with another person or with other people in a way that requires concentration, this is another way that this really, let's say, elevated state of deep presence can be invited. And so some people say we can experience this when we're doing all these daily tasks. Why would we need to take some time out to sit still doing nothing? And the question is very valid, but the reason is that when we sit still doing nothing, when we just sit down, we give the powers of our awareness much greater access to a subtler realm of concentrated presence. Now, some people say, for example, oh, my running is my meditation, or my gardening is my meditation, or when I stand on my head for 20 minutes, that's my meditation. Now, of course, these can be meditative activities, but it's not the same as subtle internal practice, because if I'm standing on my head, then my proprioceptive intelligence and many aspects of my sense powers are currently, or while I'm standing on my head, they are recruited, they are actively engaged in making sure I do not topple over, and making sure that my body is staying okay in that position, which is not without hazard. You know, if one is standing on one's head, even if one is very trained in that position, the cervical vertebrae are not to be trifled with. We need to respect that part of the body. We need to make sure that we've got a very stable foundation to protect that part of the body and protect our brain. And significant aspects of our sensory and bodily powers are oriented, relatively speaking, externally. Similarly, I could be running, for example, one time I was in Italy, I was running along a cliff path. It was such a beautiful experience, and I had a very meditative day that I was just running, and it was like, you know, along the cliff, on these, so you have to be very careful where you're placing your feet, you could fall off. It really recruits presence, and I felt fantastic. But the level of awareness is still, relatively speaking, gross, because I'm having to respond to my environment. So I'm having a wonderful, elevating, cleansing, harmonizing, uplifting experience, but my action and sense powers are still, relatively speaking, externally oriented. The idea in seated meditation is that I'm going to give all these powers of my awareness this special time, this consecrated time. And it's like the way that they have to operate when I am busy in the external world. It's like I let them just slow down for a moment. And my mind, the mind that often in our modern world gets so many demands placed upon it, it's like I can invite my mind to just go and sit down. Oh, there, in the corner, where it's sit in that sunspot and just observe. You don't have to lead this. Just allow yourself to experience that richness that you can taste and relish when you just allow yourself to participate as one of this great group, or this great gang, or this great orchestra of all the instrumental powers of awareness that I share, that the mind shares with everything else that is part of this amazing conscious bodily vehicle. And in so doing, in letting the mind take the back seat, or take a seat in a circle with all the other powers of the being, I'm training myself in the ways of more integrated action. Now, when I'm running along the cliff, or I'm standing on my head, certain powers of my awareness, they really have to move to the fore. So if I'm running along the cliff through the forest, then many of my kinesthetic and proprioceptive and my senses, they're under high demand. So they have to take a little bit more of a leading role. Just that when I come into a seated meditation quietly, then I can invite all the powers in that quiet to tune in to the common note, which can bring them all into accord. And so then when I go out into activity, they can sound and play together more harmoniously, more supportively. And there's a beautiful illustration from Shankaracharya, one of the great masters of the Indian spiritual tradition, to illustrate this. And he says, it's like the archer. So I mentioned before, I've met people who think, what are you doing sitting there doing nothing for an hour a day, or however long it is? You could be doing so much in an hour a day. Oh yeah, really? And how much time do you really think it's possible to be very productive in a day? To be really concentrated and focused? So Shankaracharya says, the meditator knows the secret that the archer knows. Now the archer, when the archer is firing his or her arrow, first what do we do? We pull the arrow back away from the target. And only if we pull the arrow back away from the target will that arrow be able to move towards the intended target with power and precision. First, we have to draw it away from the target. So same idea with meditation. We want to be effective, we want to be efficient, we want to move in the world, we want to move through the world skillfully, harmoniously. And so the idea in internal meditative practice, one of the ideas, draw inwards first, draw back from the world, come into a quiet place in which all these amazing powers of which I'm constituted can kind of tune in and come together. And when they come together and they get tuned and we find that accord, then as we move out into the realm of our day-to-day activity, we feel that much more supported. We can flow through the day that bit more easily because we've tuned all the instruments in so they can play a beautiful movement. Think of the greatest orchestra on the planet. If they don't tune up before they play the movement, it could sound disastrous and cacophonous. But when they take those few minutes to tune in, then when they play the movement, then the whole audience can be transported into that ecstatic space of transcendence and renewal. And so this is the idea. Sit down. Grant yourself. Do the heroic thing in this modern world that is always urging us to do, achieve, zone out, consume, keep going, keep pushing on. All these ways we're being pushed and pulled. Do the heroic thing. Step back, turn in, invite all the powers of your miraculous conscious vehicle to tune in to the center using a meditative support, and give them that time to come together, to find that attunement, to find that accord, so we can then go out into the day with greater ease, with greater serenity, with greater balance, which is the platform then for greater skillfulness and greater efficiency. So what I would say is that if we actually hold up those people who are really being of great public service as our examples, we might actually discover that many of them, they do have this type of practice in their day. They do give themselves some time when the mind, the senses, the bodily powers are granted that space to just settle and tune in. And of course there's many other benefits of seated meditation practice, many benefits. And from a yogic perspective, there's the idea that because in that situation, when we sit down and we give that privileged space for all the powers of our awareness to come together, then this allows the whole system to experience a very transformative type of impression. So yoga recognizes everything that we do, everything that we experience, it leaves an impression. But the impression of samadhi, the impression of yoga, the impression of that deep state of subtle internal integrated awareness, that leaves a very special type of impression. It's a deep type of impression, a very powerful type of impression, because it is experienced by the whole system as one. And so as we invite that type of experience, this is how it can be so powerful in terms of rewiring the ways that we perceive reality and cleansing, dissolving so many of our limiting beliefs and self-sabotaging habits. Because if we keep steadily inviting ourselves into that subtle internal medi-state, as samadhi emerges, then the whole system, including the mind gets the experience, oh wow, oh yes, there is this deeper richness that is available when I relax my grip on things having to be a certain way, and I allow myself to come into that state of mutual support with all the other powers of my awareness. I don't need to grip so firmly. And where does this beautiful feeling of calm and serenity and wholeness and fullness and satisfaction come from? It's nothing to do with anything outside. We experience it here, within the realm of our own awareness. So it's also a very empowering practice. It makes us more independent, and it also encourages us in the sense of making us less susceptible to fear and more courageous, because we start to understand in the visceral lived experience of our own bodies that this place of deep satisfaction, of deep peace, does not depend on anything outside ourselves, but is actually right here, pulsating within us, if we will just orient towards it, if we will just find the courage to stop, get quiet, sit down. And even if the world is raging and whirling around us, even if we're in a very noisy place, internally, we give ourselves that little bit of time and space to recalibrate, to sit down, having taken that seat, having invited all the powers to come into cohesion. Then we can step out into life with a refreshed perspective, and one that is very supportive, very empowering, and can hopefully help us then navigate reality more skillfully and live our day-to-day in a way that's a little bit more fulfilling. So it's a really good idea to sit down every day. Morning and evening, fantastic. Before we start the day, before we start the evening, give all the powers of our awareness that special time to come together, to tune in and set ourselves up for a richer, fuller, more easeful rest of our day and evening. Thank you.